A man saves a trapped bear, then it refuses to leave his side. In the wild heart of Northern California's Redwood National Park, a single moment can change everything. Out here, where towering trees scrape the sky and mist drifts like whispers through ancient groves, quiet miracles sometimes unfold. This is a story about one such miracle, a remarkable bond between a man scarred by life's trials and a wounded bear too stubborn to let go of hope. Their chance encounter beneath the redwoods sets off a chain of events neither could have foreseen, forging an unbreakable connection that defies nature's boundaries. Prepare to be moved by a tale of courage, trust, and unexpected companionship. Ethan McAllister had lived along the edge of Redwood National Park for half a decade, tucked away in a humble, cedar-shingled cabin he'd built with his own two hands. The cabin wasn't large, but it was cozy. A single bedroom, a kitchen that opened to the living area, and a broad porch where he could sit and breathe in the crisp forest air each morning. Over time, the redwoods felt like his silent neighbors, standing guard around him, giants of time and testament to resilience. Years ago, Ethan had come here looking for a place where his mind could find quiet. After a stint in the Marines that ended in both physical and emotional scars, homecoming had been its own battle. No matter how hard he tried, the bright lights of the city felt claustrophobic crowds pressed in on him. Daily noise rattled his nerves. He longed for the hush of nature. Though Redwood National Park saw its share of tourists, especially near its trails, his little patch of land was far from the usual footpaths. Most mornings, he walked the perimeter of his property, typically armed with nothing but an old Nikon Date 150 camera. Over the years, he'd found solace in photography. He snapped photos of swirling fog around the towering trunks or the delicate way sunlight filtered through the canopy at dawn. During these walks, he'd sometimes see wildlife herds of Roosevelt elk grazing in meadows, raccoons scampering across logs, even a fox darting into the underbrush. But black bears, though known to live among the redwoods, were elusive. Ethan had seen only glimpses of their silhouettes at a distance. The forest was a home to him now. Its patterns, its temperaments, its quiet rhythms, he felt he knew them all. Redwood National Park's grandeur had become part of his daily life. At night, the wind sang him lullabies as it passed through the high branches. By day, sunlight glinted on dew-soaked ferns, reminding him there was beauty in the simple moments. He never expected that the forest would one day call on him to be a hero, to play a life and death role in saving one of its own. If someone had asked him the day before this all began, whether he believed in destiny or fate, he might have shrugged. He often believed life just happened. But sometimes, life had a knack for putting you exactly where you were needed most, no matter how broken you might feel. When the morning came that Ethan stumbled upon a scene that would forever alter his existence, the redwoods stood silent watch. They bore witness, as they had for centuries of human drama, to an extraordinary moment of compassion that would bridge the gap between man and beast. A moment that would test Ethan's courage, ignite his empathy, and open his heart to an unlikely companion he never dreamed he'd have. Ethan's past was a patchwork of hardship and resilience. Raised in a modest home in Sacramento, he learned early on that life could be uncertain. His father worked long shifts as a mechanic at a local Ford dealership, piecing together a livelihood that mostly kept food on the table. His mother, a teacher, balanced her classroom responsibilities with raising Ethan and his two younger sisters. Despite their warmth, Ethan always felt a quiet restlessness he couldn't name. That restlessness took him into the Marines at 18. He sought purpose, discipline, maybe even adventure. What he found was a brotherhood forged in sweat and tears, and a sense of belonging that felt like the missing puzzle piece in his life. However, it wasn't all camaraderie. Deployed overseas, he witnessed tragedies that left invisible imprints on his psyche. Once he returned stateside, the nightmares started red-hot flashes of memory that would jolt him awake at night. He'd gasped for air, sweat-drenched, alone in the dark. A few months after his discharge, he tried living back in Sacramento, but the city's hustle felt suffocating. Crowds made his heart race, sirens triggered old anxieties. He enrolled in a local community college, but the lecture halls and group projects brought on claustrophobic dread he couldn't shake. He left after a single semester, much to his family's disappointment. Feeling the weight of the world bearing down on him, Ethan spent what savings he had on a used Ford F-150 and ventured north. He had distant memories of Redwood National Park, from a childhood family trip, how small he'd felt in those mammoth forests. Yet oddly safe, that sense of awe had lingered in his mind ever since. When he arrived at the outskirts of the park, it was late autumn. He found a plot of land for sale rugged, a bit remote, and something in him whispered that this was where he needed to be. He bought it with the help of a small inheritance left by his late grandfather. Over the next year, he built his cabin with reclaimed timber and a firm determination not to rely on anyone else. Every nail he hammered felt like a small victory over his restless spirit. Living in the deep forest offered a sense of peace. He learned to handle isolation, to be content with his own company. He took up photography to stay present in the moment, capturing nature's fleeting wonders with his Nikon date 150. Each shutter click was a meditation, a step toward healing. He also adopted a routine, a morning walk with his camera, a midday break to read or tinker with the truck, an evening spent splitting logs or cooking simple meals by the fireplace. But even in the peaceful redwood wilderness, some nights the nightmares found him. Memories of friends lost, gunfire echoing in desert winds, the weight of guilt for surviving when others hadn't. He never spoke of it to anyone. He rarely saw neighbors, and he mostly liked it that way. He never imagined that the forest itself might offer him another kind of companionship, one that would challenge his beliefs about healing, trust, and the invisible lines between species. The morning air in Redwood National Park was crisp, often tinged with a lingering dampness from the coastal fog that rolled in off the Pacific Ocean. Each day, Ethan would rise before dawn, boil water on his old propane stove, and sip black coffee while the world was still dark. The faint glow of the sunrise would gradually reveal the silhouettes of the colossal redwoods, their trunks like silent sentinels standing watch over him. This daily ritual had become his lifeline. With each step along the narrow trail that circled his property, he felt his mind clear. He listened for the forest's subtle symphony, the rustle of a squirrel scampering through leaf litter, the soft call of distant birds, and the drip of condensation off fern fronds. The redwood canopy was never silent, always alive, with a gentle murmur that reminded Ethan he wasn't alone, not truly. When he wasn't on his morning walk, he kept busy with odd tasks. Although Redwood National Park drew visitors year-round, Ethan's property was relatively secluded. Occasionally, the local park rangers would swing by for a courtesy check, or a lost hiker might wander too far off a main trail. Ethan would offer them water, directions, sometimes even a ride if they'd grown exhausted. Those small interactions reminded him that he was part of a broader tapestry, even if he tended to isolate himself. One late summer day, Ethan found himself on a more extensive hike than usual, following a faint path he'd never fully explored. Something in the morning breeze beckoned him deeper, as though a quiet voice in the wind whispered that he should wander beyond his usual boundaries. With his camera slung around his neck, he ventured further into the forest, past moss-covered logs and through a grove where the sunlight filtered in diagonal beams. illuminating dancing dust motes in the air. He noticed subtle changes in the terrain. The ground grew rockier, the ferns sparser. Eventually, he came upon a creek snaking its way through a ravine. He paused to snap some photos. The water glistened like liquid silver under the sun's gentle rays. Ethan felt a soothing calm in moments like these, as though each shutter click grounded him more firmly in the present. What he didn't know was that fate was leading him to a situation far beyond the scope of a mere photo opportunity. Nature had a different plan that day, and his quiet, predictable life was about to be overturned in a way he'd never anticipated. At the time, he simply felt that subtle tug urging him on. Maybe it was the memory of that childhood wonder, gazing up at the redwoods for the first time, or the constant yearning for solace, which he believed lay deeper in the wild. Whatever it was, he followed without question, drawn along by the soft hush of leaves. Little did he suspect that around the next bend in that ravine, a trapped creature lay in dire need of help, one that would, in its own way, help heal the wounded corners of Ethan's own heart. The first sign that something was off came as a low, distressed growl reverberating through the ravine. Ethan froze mid-step. He had heard the playful snorts of black bears rummaging through fallen logs in search of insects, and he knew the distinct, alarmed huff they made if they caught his scent. But this sound was different, desperate, laced with pain. His heart thumped loudly in his chest as he carefully advanced, scanning the surroundings. Tall ferns and the wide trunks of the redwoods obscured much of the ravine floor. Another plaintive cry echoed, followed by a scuffling noise that sent Ethan's pulse skyrocketing. He moved quietly, each step calculated to avoid snapping twigs. He did not want to startle the bear any more than it already was. Then he saw it, a black bear, a bit smaller than average for its kind, trapped in a cruel snare. Its left hind leg was caught in a steel trap that had likely been set illegally. Poaching was not unheard of on the fringes of Redwood National Park. A wave of anger and heartbreak rolled over Ethan. He despised the idea that someone would set such a device here. The bear jerked frantically against the trap's jaws, trying to free itself. The chain rattled against the rocks with each violent tug. A patch of the bear's fur was matted with blood. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he realized that if he didn't intervene, the animal might die either from the injury or from sheer exhaustion and starvation. He took a moment to gather his courage. Approaching a wounded, terrified bear was a recipe for disaster if done recklessly. He made sure he had a clear path of retreat in case the bear decided to charge, though it was obviously hindered by the trap. Gently he called out, "Easy, easy there," his voice trembling slightly. The bear eyed him, ears flattened, teeth bared in a defensive grimace. Ethan noted that the bear was a young adult, perhaps 2 or 3 years old. Its coat was glossy black, except for a faint splash of brown around the muzzle. Despite its predicament, it had a fierceness in its eyes. A part of Ethan admired its spirit, that refusal to give in. He fumbled for his phone to call the local park rangers, but realized there was no signal in this part of the forest. He made a snap decision. He couldn't leave the bear in agony while he searched for a signal. He carefully set his Nikon down on a safe rock shelf and retrieved a heavy multi-tool from his belt. He inched closer, knees slightly bent, every muscle alert. The bear growled sharply, clearly on the brink of either collapsing or fighting back. "Stay calm," Ethan whispered, as if the animal could somehow sense his sincerity. Time felt slow, each second stretching into an eternity as he knelt beside the trap. With careful precision, he started to work the release mechanism. His hands were trembling, slick with sweat. If the bear panicked, one swipe of its paw could do serious harm. Yet Ethan pressed on, determined. Metal clanged and sparked under the multi-tool's pressure. The bear snorted and snapped, but stayed put, perhaps too weak or in too much pain to thrash about more aggressively. Finally, Ethan managed to pry the jaws of the trap open wide enough. In one fluid motion, he yanked the bear's leg free. Ethan jumped back, heart hammering. The bear let out a furious roar, then collapsed onto its side, panting, freed at last. Ethan watched as the bear attempted to stand, but its wounded leg buckled beneath it. Compassion flooding him, he realized the bear wasn't going anywhere, not without help. Ethan felt a flicker of panic. What does one do with a bleeding, half-crazed bear? He had a rudimentary first aid kit in his rucksack, just gauze, disinfectant, some bandages. That would suffice for a human scrape or cut, but for a bear, he wasn't sure it would help much, yet he couldn't just walk away. Steeling himself, he slowly approached the bear again, careful to keep his movements fluid and unthreatening. The animal growled low in its throat, eyes reflecting a mixture of pain and wariness. Ethan's instincts screamed for him to keep distance, but compassion spurred him on. He knelt a few feet away and murmured soft reassurances, though he knew the bear couldn't understand his words. Still, animals could sense intention, at least that's what he believed. Gradually, he inched closer, gauze in hand. His heart thundered as he gently dabbed at the bleeding wound on the bear's hind leg. Each contact made the bear twitch or grunt, but it didn't lash out. "God, what have they done to you?" Ethan muttered under his breath. The wound was worse up close, ragged flesh, torn by the steel trap. If infection set in, it could be fatal. He poured a small amount of disinfectant over the gash. The bear roared with pain, snapping its jaws at the air. Ethan lunged backward, nearly losing his balance. They stared at each other, man and beast, eyes locked in a strange standoff. Ethan's pulse pounded, but he forced himself to approach again. This time, the bear allowed him to finish cleaning the wound, as though it recognized he was trying to help. He gingerly wrapped a strip of bandage around the leg, tying it off with trembling fingers. For a moment, they both went still, as if uncertain of what came next. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the only sound the bear's ragged panting. Ethan could feel the animal's fear, but also a sense that it was beyond exhausted. He wondered if it even had the energy to try to stand. "Hang on," he whispered, slowly standing upright. He retrieved his phone, but still no signal. If he was going to get help for this bear, he'd have to get it back to his cabin, or at least to a place where a ranger's vehicle could reach. But how to transport a bear? He gazed around, desperate for a solution. A small cart of some sort? His cabin wasn't too far off, maybe a mile or so. He had an old wheelbarrow out by his tool shed, but the mere thought of moving a wounded bear that way seemed absurd. Still, time was ticking. He was certain the bear needed more extensive medical attention. He offered the bear some water from his canteen, carefully pouring it into a shallow indentation in a nearby rock. To his surprise, the bear lapped at it. The tension in his chest eased a fraction. At least the bear was coherent enough to drink. That was a good sign, right? Standing, Ethan turned in the direction of his cabin. He had no other choice but to try to fetch help. "I'll be back," he said softly, though he knew it sounded ridiculous to talk to a wild animal. Yet something in the bear's eyes almost seemed to register the words. As Ethan began to jog away, he glanced over his shoulder. The bear, prone on the ground and panting, lifted its head to watch him go. For an instant, Ethan felt an odd surge of connection. It was as if the forest had orchestrated this meeting, bridging the gap between two wounded souls. He didn't realize it at the time, but that moment was the seed of a bond that would change both of their lives forever. Ethan's cabin felt miles away in that moment, though it was probably closer to a mile hike. By the time he broke through the tree line and found himself on his property, his lungs burned from running and his mind raced with questions. Could he find a park ranger in time? Would they even agree to help rescue a wounded bear? Typically, wildlife experts preferred to let nature run its course, but this scenario involved an illegal trap. He hoped that might compel them to intervene. Fumbling with his phone on the porch, he was relieved to see he had a faint signal. He quickly dialed the Redwood National Park ranger station, breath hitching with every ring. When the dispatcher answered, Ethan explained the situation in a rapid rush. Wounded black bear, stuck in a steel trap, illegal snare, still alive but injured. The dispatcher's tone turned serious. "We'll send someone out, but it might take a couple hours for a truck to get there. You're deep in the park boundary, right?" Ethan confirmed his location, then hung up, heart still pounding. He filled a backpack with medical supplies, whatever he could find that might be remotely useful, along with rope, a blanket, and a few protein bars for himself. He also grabbed his .357 revolver, not out of a desire to harm the bear, but because he was about to walk into a precarious situation. He hoped he wouldn't need it. He sped off in his old Ford F-150, rumbling down the dirt road that led deeper into the forest. After parking as far as the narrow trail would allow, he hopped out and continued on foot, carefully navigating the terrain back to the ravine where he'd left the bear. He half expected the bear to be gone or worse, but as he approached, he heard soft panting and subdued whimpers that signaled the animal was still there. The bear lifted its head at his approach, ears twitching. Ethan knelt down to check the makeshift bandage. It was soaked with blood, but at least it was helping. He offered more water in a shallow plastic container from his pack. The bear drank, albeit weakly, and then laid its head back down. A swirl of relief and sadness tugged at Ethan. Never in his life had he been so close to a bear for this long, let alone a wounded one that somehow tolerated his presence. He felt a surge of protectiveness. He didn't want to see this creature die, not after surviving that cruel trap. Minutes stretched into an hour, then another. Finally, the sound of footsteps and faint voices reached Ethan's ears. 2 park rangers, a man named Henry Barnes and a woman named Annalise Vogel, appeared on the path. Henry, gruff and bearded, carried a large rifle loaded with tranquilizer darts. Annalise held a first aid kit designed for wildlife emergencies. They surveyed the scene, eyebrows knitted in concern. "We got your call," Henry said. "Illegal trap, you said." Ethan pointed to the steel jaws lying on the ground a few feet away. Annalise knelt by the bear, examining the wound. She administered a mild tranquilizer to keep it calm, then began to redress the injury with more professional gear. "We'll need to transport it to the Redwood Veterinary Clinic," Annalise said, glancing at Ethan. "I can't handle this level of injury here. The bear needs sutures and possibly antibiotics." Ethan's heart lifted slightly. There was a chance then. Together they rigged a makeshift stretcher from a tarp and sturdy branches. With a combination of gentle maneuvering and the bear's own limited mobility, they hoisted it onto the stretcher. It let out a few distressed growls, but mostly it seemed too exhausted to resist. Under the ranger's guidance, Ethan helped carry the bear along the narrow trail. It was a slow, laborious process, but after about 30 painstaking minutes, they reached Henry's ranger truck. Loading the bear took another coordinated effort, but eventually they secured the injured animal in the truck bed, carefully padded with blankets. As the rangers prepared to drive off, Ethan stood by with a sense of both relief and lingering anxiety. He placed a hand on the truck's edge, locking eyes with the bear one last time before they took it away. Something in those dark eyes sparked an unexpected tenderness. Ethan exhaled a shaky breath, silently wishing the bear strength and a swift recovery. Little did he know the story was far from over. For now, though, he had done his part. The wounded bear was in caring hands. Yet as the truck disappeared around a bend, Ethan felt a sudden pang of emptiness, as though part of him had gone with that bear. He never imagined he would see it again, but fate, as he was learning, had other plans. In the days following the bear's rescue, Ethan hovered in a haze of concern and anticipation. He called the Redwood Veterinary Clinic several times, inquiring about the bear's condition. HIPAA, like protocols for wildlife rescue, weren't as strict as for humans, but there was still some discretion about sharing details. Thankfully, Dr. Patricia Yuan, the lead veterinarian, was kind enough to provide updates. She mentioned that the bear was young, likely a sub-adult, and showed remarkable resilience. Surgery went well. They extracted fragments of steel, cleaned out infection, and stitched up the torn flesh. The bear was recovering in a wildlife rehab enclosure adjacent to the clinic. If all went smoothly, it would be released back into Redwood National Park once it was strong enough to fend for itself. One morning, about 2 weeks after the rescue, Ethan decided to drive into town for supplies. The small local grocery store was about a 40-minute drive from his cabin. On impulse, he took a detour and headed toward the veterinary clinic. He wasn't sure why. Part of him just needed to see that the bear was still alive and healing. When he arrived, Dr. Yuan recognized him immediately. "Ah, you're the Good Samaritan," she teased with a warm smile. She led him out back to a secured area where they rehabilitated larger wildlife. Through a chain-link fence, Ethan saw the bear pacing around, its hind leg bandaged but noticeably improved. In a nearby enclosure, a couple of raccoons chattered noisily, but the bear paid them no mind. "It's a tough one," Dr. Yuan said, resting her palm on the fence. "We'll keep it here for another week or two, then release it. As long as there are no complications, that's the plan." Ethan felt an unexpected surge of relief, mixed with something else, an odd fondness for this wild creature. The bear, sensing their presence, glanced over. Its eyes met Ethan's through the fence. For a fleeting moment, Ethan could have sworn the bear recognized him. A low, soft grunt emerged from its throat. A swirl of warmth flooded Ethan's chest. Maybe he was projecting human emotions onto an animal, but he felt an undeniable pull of connection. Dr. Yuan broke the moment with a light laugh. "It seems to like you," she commented. "That's unusual. Bears are generally solitary and can remain hostile to humans, especially after trauma like this." Ethan visited a few more times, usually dropping by after picking up mail or groceries in town. Each time, the bear seemed to respond to him with mild curiosity rather than aggression. Dr. Yuan found it heartening and a bit puzzling. Then came the release day. Early one morning, the park rangers loaded the now healthy bear into a transport crate, taking it deep into Redwood National Park to a location near where it had been found. They let Ethan come along, his presence giving him both closure and a chance to say goodbye. Once at the site, the rangers opened the crate's door. For a moment, the bear hesitated, blinking at the sunlight. Then it lumbered out, sniffing the air. Ethan watched, chest tight, as the bear ambled deeper into the forest and out of sight. Life went on. Ethan resumed his quiet days, his solitary hikes and photography sessions. Yet something had shifted. He found himself pausing at random intervals, half expecting to see a glimpse of dark fur in the brush or to hear that distinct gruff huff of a bear. It never came. Weeks passed, then a month, until one crisp autumn morning, Ethan woke to an unexpected sound outside his cabin, a low, rumbling moan. Alarmed, he grabbed his revolver and inched onto the porch. His jaw nearly dropped. Standing there, just beyond the clearing, was the bear. Limping only slightly, it stared at him with those familiar eyes. For a few charged seconds, neither moved. Then the bear let out a soft grunt, an almost endearing noise that Ethan had heard at the clinic. He lowered his gun, heart drumming. What was the bear doing here? Had it really come looking for him? The idea felt surreal. Yet there it stood, a living testament to their strange bond. Slowly, Ethan walked down the steps, arms out to show he meant no harm. The bear huffed but didn't retreat. It sniffed the air, shuffling closer, each step a deliberate choice. Ethan dared not move too fast. Eventually, they found themselves barely a dozen feet apart, man and bear. He spoke in hushed tones, half laughing in disbelief. "Hey there, buddy. Didn't expect to see you again." Little did Ethan know, this was only the beginning of a remarkable friendship, one that would challenge his notions of isolation, trust, and the invisible lines that normally separated humans from the wild. Ethan found himself navigating an uncharted territory of coexistence. Over the next few weeks, the bear lingered around his cabin area more often than not. It seemed to adopt a pattern of appearing early in the morning, sometimes venturing close enough that Ethan could see the faint scars on its hind leg where the trap had snapped shut. Other days, it was content to wander deeper into the woods, only to amble back by nightfall. Ethan had no intention of domesticating this wild creature. He respected the bear's nature. However, he couldn't help but feel responsible for its well-being. He started leaving out a small bowl of water near a stump behind his cabin, and sometimes scraps of fish or leftover venison if he had any. The bear would approach cautiously, sniffing the offering before devouring it. Their interactions remained cautious. Ethan never tried to pet or touch the bear, and the bear never initiated contact beyond a curious sniff from a safe distance. Despite the inherent risks, something about this routine felt oddly comforting. Ethan's nightmares began to wane. He slept more soundly, lulled by the sense that he wasn't truly alone in the forest anymore. On his morning walks, he'd sometimes hear branches snapping behind him, only to glance back and see the bear trailing along at a distance, as if standing guard. Word spread quickly among the local rangers. Henry Barnes, the older ranger, dropped by one afternoon, stepping out of his jeep to see the bear dozing under a nearby tree. "I'll be honest," Henry said, whistling low. "I've never seen anything like this. It's a black bear, not some petting zoo animal. Be careful, Ethan." Henry's words echoed what Ethan already knew, that this was not a normal situation. The rangers couldn't legally force the bear to leave. It wasn't actively causing trouble, and Redwood National Park was its rightful domain. Still, the developing closeness unsettled them, worried that familiarity might lead to danger down the line. But every day that passed without incident only deepened the bond. One crisp morning, Ethan sat on his porch, sipping coffee. The bear emerged from the tree line, wandering up and settling about 10 feet away, resting its massive head on its paws. A calm silence enveloped them, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl returning late from its nocturnal hunt. Ethan felt an inexplicable sense of safety in the bear's presence, a mutual recognition that neither intended harm. He began to talk to the bear as if it were a quiet confidant. Sometimes he'd murmur about his dreams, or mention how he'd been to the local hardware store to pick up new nails for cabin repairs. It was almost therapeutic, letting the words flow into the silence of the forest. He didn't expect an answer, but the bear's patient gaze seemed to offer understanding. When he photographed the bear, the pictures captured not just a wild animal, but something in its eyes, an echo of shared experience. Ethan found a certain humility in its presence. Here was a being that had suffered cruelty, yet it chose to return, forging a bridge of trust that transcended the usual laws of predator-prey or man versus nature. In that vulnerability, Ethan recognized parts of himself, the soldier who returned home wounded, the man who sought solace in isolation, the quiet spirit who just wanted to belong. Over time, the scars on the bear's leg healed into a thin line of pink flesh, hidden beneath new fur. And as the bear grew stronger, so did Ethan's resolve to move past his own traumas. It was as if they were healing together, each day unveiling new threads in the tapestry of their unlikely friendship. Not everyone shared Ethan's awe, As stories circulated about a bear that seemed friendly toward a local resident, skepticism and concern sprouted in the community. A neighbor, an older man named Frank Willis, who lived about 2 miles down the road, cornered Ethan one morning at the small post office in town. "You know what happens when bears get too comfortable around humans, don't you?" Frank said, voice gruff. "They turn into a problem, bears rummaging through garbage and scaring folks. Then the state might have to put him down." Ethan bristled. "He's not rummaging through anyone's trash," he retorted. He hesitated, not sure how to articulate the complex bond he shared with the bear. "He's different," he finally said. Frank harumphed, unconvinced, and stomped off to his truck. The exchange left Ethan feeling unsettled. He knew the consequences if the bear started roaming into populated areas or raiding campsites. He resolved to be more cautious, ensuring that he never left large amounts of food scraps lying around. It was a delicate balance, offering occasional snacks to sustain the bond, yet not encouraging dependency or a habit of seeking human food. Despite the tension, the bond between man and bear strengthened. On one particularly cold evening, Ethan noticed the bear pacing anxiously at the edge of the clearing. He grabbed his flashlight and ventured out to see what was wrong. That's when he realized a mountain lion was nearby, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The bear, still not fully mature in size, felt threatened. Upon Ethan's approach, the lion slinked back into the woods, leaving the bear trembling with adrenaline. Ethan stood there, heart pounding, aware that he was dangerously close to a large predator standoff, yet neither animal harmed him. In a bizarre twist, Ethan's presence seemed to calm the bear, and perhaps spook the lion enough to retreat. Another challenge came when Redwood National Park's game wardens set new guidelines for visitors, urging them to keep food locked away. Reports of an unusually unafraid bear wandering near trails had started to surface. One day, a group of day hikers stumbled upon the bear while it was dozing in the sunlit moss. Although the bear didn't act aggressively, the hikers panicked. They snapped photos from an uncomfortably close distance, and the next day, the warden's office had calls about a dangerously tame bear. Ethan found himself in a delicate position, fielding concerned looks from the rangers. Annalise Vogel even showed up at his cabin, walking the perimeter, scanning for signs of trouble. She warned Ethan that if the bear caused a single harmful incident, the wildlife authorities might be forced to relocate it or worse. Ethan's stomach twisted at the thought, but he couldn't deny the risk. One afternoon, the bear surprised him by lumbering onto his porch while he was inside. He heard a scraping sound, turned around, and there it was, sniffing the air near his door. Alarmed, Ethan gently shooed it away, not wanting it to become too brazen. Still, the bear lingered, only backing off after Ethan insisted. "You can't make a habit of this," he muttered under his breath, feeling both exasperated and oddly amused. Yet through all these close calls and community concerns, their bond remained. Each new day taught Ethan a lesson in responsibility and empathy. He knew the gravity of the situation. If the bear harmed someone or got too comfortable around humans, it would spell disaster for them both. In many ways, he felt like a guardian, determined to protect the very creature that had become, in an inexplicable way, his friend. As rumors about the tame black bear and its unlikely human companion rippled through town and among park visitors, opinions polarized. Some people, like Dr. Yuan, admired the connection, seeing it as a testament to the resilience of both man and animal. She even suggested that Ethan collaborate with a local conservation group to share his experience, hoping it might raise awareness about the dangers of illegal trapping. Others were openly critical. Frank Willis continued to lobby for the bear's removal. In a heated exchange at the local diner, he accused Ethan of recklessness. "You think you're doing that creature a favor?" he growled, jabbing a finger in Ethan's direction. "You're signing its death warrant if it starts thinking all humans are safe." Nearby patrons looked on, some nodding in agreement, others uncomfortable with the confrontation. Ethan felt torn. He understood Frank's argument. A bear that loses its natural wariness can become a threat to itself and others. But he also believed that the bear, having suffered so much, deserved compassion. He tried to find a middle ground. He researched ways to maintain boundaries, to ensure the bear wouldn't wander into campsites or approach strangers. If he heard about hikers in the area, he'd quietly steer the bear away, guiding it deeper into the forest with gentle encouragement and sometimes a tossed fish or piece of jerky in a safer direction. Word reached local media outlets, and a freelance journalist named Carla Peterson contacted Ethan, requesting an interview. At first, he was hesitant. Publicizing this could escalate tensions and shine an even brighter spotlight on the bear. But Carla was persistent, explaining she wanted to highlight the dangers of poaching and the need for humane wildlife management. They met one afternoon at Ethan's cabin, the redwoods towering overhead. Carla, wearing hiking boots and a camouflage jacket, asked pointed questions while her camera recorded. How does it feel, forging a bond with a creature that could, under normal circumstances, be a threat to your life? Ethan paused, searching for the right words. "It's humbling," he finally said. "We have this idea that bears are mindless or purely dangerous, but I've come to see they have instincts, emotions, even fear. I think we share more common ground than we realize." The interview went viral in a local sense, shared on community Facebook pages and small conservation sites. Dozens of people left comments, some lauding Ethan as a hero, others condemning his actions as irresponsible. Park rangers found themselves in the middle, reassuring the public they were monitoring the situation. Annalise Vogel, the ranger who helped rescue the bear initially, tried to keep a balanced perspective. She recognized the uniqueness of Ethan's bond with the animal, but also feared the potential consequences. After a town hall meeting where concerned citizens voiced their opinions, Annalise approached Ethan in the parking lot. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement. "We're trying our best," she told him, her voice a gentle mix of caution and empathy. "But if there's even one incident where the bear acts aggressively or shows up where it shouldn't, we'll have to consider relocating it. You know that, right?" Ethan nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I understand. I don't want to lose this connection. It feels important, somehow." She gave him a small, encouraging smile. "Just promise you'll be careful." Careful, that was the word that echoed in Ethan's mind as he drove home that evening. He found the bear waiting by the tree line, as if sensing his return. Careful, because a single misstep could unravel the fragile piece they'd built. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on him, a heavy burden balanced by the quiet joy of living side by side with one of nature's most majestic creatures. Late autumn arrived, painting the forest in russet and gold. Fog draped the redwoods in hushed mystery, and the days grew shorter. With the chill in the air, animals started foraging more aggressively, preparing for the lean winter months ahead. The bear, now stronger and more confident, ranged farther afield. Some days Ethan wouldn't see it at all, and a pang of worry gnawed at him. Other times, the bear would show up at dawn, rummaging in the leaf litter for grubs near the cabin. One frigid morning, chaos erupted. Ethan was on his usual walk, camera in hand, when he heard distant shouting. Racing toward the commotion, he discovered a small campsite of weekend hikers in disarray. Tents were toppled, belongings strewn about, and in the midst of it all, the bear. It had evidently smelled food in the campers' packs and ventured too close. Startled, one of the hikers panicked and started throwing rocks. The bear, agitated, had swiped at a tent, ripping a hole in the fabric. The campers scrambled, terrified. "Get away from it!" one shouted, brandishing a large branch. The bear roared, rearing up on its hind legs, a clear warning display. Ethan's heart clenched. This was exactly the scenario he dreaded. Without a second thought, he rushed in between the campers and the bear, arms outstretched. "Stop!" he shouted, voice cracking with urgency. The sudden movement caught the bear's attention. It lowered its front paws, huffing anxiously. Ethan spoke in a calm, measured tone, the same tone he used during their earlier encounters. Slowly, carefully, he guided the bear backward, away from the campsite. The hikers gawked, disbelief etched on their faces. One of them fumbled for a phone to call for help. It took several tense minutes, but Ethan managed to steer the bear far enough into the woods that it no longer felt cornered. Finally, it broke eye contact and loped away, disappearing into the thick underbrush. Only then did Ethan turn to face the stunned campers. Their fear turned to anger, and they unleashed a barrage of accusations at Ethan for training the bear to approach humans. Park rangers arrived shortly after. They interviewed the shaken campers, who demanded the bear be captured or euthanized for public safety. Annalise Vogel stepped in, trying to defuse the situation. She pointed out that the campers had left food unsecured, which violated standard guidelines. Still, the tension was palpable. One camper brandished a bleeding scratch on his arm, insisting he'd been attacked. Another threatened legal action. Ethan stood by, feeling helpless and heartsick. The bear hadn't tried to maul anyone. It was foraging, reacting to perceived threats. But in the eyes of these outsiders, it was a dangerous beast. Henry Barnes showed up, giving Ethan a grim look. "We might not have a choice this time," the ranger said quietly. "We can't risk someone getting seriously hurt." In the days that followed, Redwood National Park officials debated the bear's fate. Some argued for relocation to a remote area. Others, citing the bear's comfort with humans, feared it would wander back or become a danger elsewhere. Euthanasia loomed as an unsettling possibility. Desperate, Ethan reached out to Dr. Patricia Yuan at the Redwood Veterinary Clinic. If anyone could champion the bear's cause, it was her. She wrote a formal letter to the park administration, attesting to the bear's adaptability and gentle nature. She offered to facilitate a more structured rehabilitation, perhaps in a specialized sanctuary. Meanwhile, local conservation groups rallied behind Ethan. Online petitions garnered signatures advocating for the bear's right to live. During a tense community meeting, Ethan spoke to a packed room, voice trembling. He recounted the bear's rescue from the illegal trap and how it had forged an unlikely trust in humans. "Taking its life would be punishing it for our mistakes," he pleaded. His words hung in the air as the officials conferred. A final decision was reached. The bear would be relocated to a protected wildlife sanctuary in northern Oregon, a place equipped to handle semi-habituated animals. For Ethan, the news was bittersweet. The bear would live but far away from Redwood National Park and from him. Yet he knew it was the best compromise, ensuring the bear's safety and the public's. With a heavy heart, he accepted that redemption for both of them meant letting go. On a crisp morning that smelled of cedar and possibility, 2 wildlife trucks and a trailer arrived at Ethan's cabin. The plan was to tranquilize the bear and transport it north to the sanctuary. Dr. Yuan came along. Her gentle touch and calm demeanor meant to ease the process. Henry Barnes and Annalise Vogel stood by, solemn and efficient. Ethan felt a lump forming in his throat, but he tried to appear steady. Over the last few months, the bear had become more than just an animal in his care. It was a mirror that reflected his own wounded spirit, teaching him about patience, trust, and second chances. Knowing that the bear would leave weighed heavy on him. Yet he also recognized it was the right path, a necessary step to ensure its continued survival. They found the bear resting near a moss-covered boulder, the early sunlight warming its glossy black fur. Dr. Yuan loaded the tranquilizer dart and fired, hitting the bear's flank. Startled, it lurched upright, let out a low growl, then staggered as the sedative took hold. Ethan rushed over, ignoring the cautions to keep distance. He knelt by the bear's side, his hand hovering over its scarred hind leg, tears threatening to blur his vision. "Thank you," he whispered, though he wasn't quite sure if he was thanking the bear or the universe, or both. The bear blinked, its breathing slowing, eyes heavy with the drug. Gently, the team hoisted it onto a stretcher, maneuvering it into the trailer lined with hay and blankets. Annalise touched Ethan's shoulder. "You did good," she said softly, and he nodded, unable to form words. The convoy departed, tires crunching over gravel as they disappeared down the winding road. Ethan remained standing in the clearing long after the sound of engines faded. A deep quiet settled over the forest, a quiet that felt both immense and lonely. In the days that followed, he wandered his usual paths, camera in hand, half expecting to see a familiar shape slipping between the redwoods. Each time he remembered, it was like a small ache in his chest. Yet in the wake of the bear's departure, Ethan found himself changed. His nightmares were less frequent. The idea of returning to city life no longer filled him with dread. He'd visited the small nearby town, more often even volunteering at a local animal rescue fundraiser. He reconnected with old military buddies via phone calls, bridging a gap he'd once thought impossible to cross. In a stroke of serendipity, a letter arrived from the Northern Oregon Wildlife Sanctuary a month after the relocation. Dr. Yuan had arranged for them to send updates. They wrote that the bear was thriving, adapting well to the sanctuary's spacious habitat. Enclosed was a photograph, the bear, leg scar barely visible, standing on a rock formation against a backdrop of evergreen trees. It appeared robust, its eyes reflecting curiosity rather than fear. Holding that photo, Ethan felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. Resilience, connection, personal growth, those were the gifts the bear had brought into his life. He realized that, in saving the bear, he had also saved a piece of himself. He folded the photograph gently and slipped it into his journal, where he recorded his thoughts and reflections. Despite the lingering emptiness around his cabin, Ethan pressed forward. He continued his photography, capturing the forest's changing seasons. The redwood giants still stood, whispering their ancient counsel. He also found himself more open to companionship, whether from occasional hikers seeking a friendly face or from the quiet joys of playing his old acoustic guitar, letting the notes echo through the clearing. Life in the shadow of the redwoods had taught him that every ending was a new beginning. The chapter of his story with the bear had concluded, but the lessons remained, etched into his heart as surely as the healing scar on the bear's leg. And in that subtle yet profound transformation, Ethan recognized that moving on didn't mean forgetting, it meant growing. Standing taller, much like the mighty redwoods ready to embrace whatever waited on the horizon. Thank you for watching this incredible story of courage, connection, and the power of second chances. If you've been moved by Ethan's journey and the remarkable bond he formed with a once trapped bear, know that nature has a unique way of reminding us we are all part of a greater whole. Each act of compassion can ripple outward, transforming not only the lives of those we help, but our own lives as well. Now, I invite you to be part of this shared narrative. Like this video if the story touched your heart, share it with friends who believe in the magic of nature, and subscribe to our channel to discover more uplifting tales from the wild. Your support helps us bring inspiring stories to life, reminding everyone that hope and empathy can bridge even the widest divides. Stay tuned for more, and thank you for being here.